Well, hi, everybody. I'm Julie Ponesse here, and we're doing the 1-year book anniversary event. But as almost invariably happens, we had technical difficulties. So I don't know how many of you are seeing this or finding this, but I think I should just wait a little bit until we see some people, some people show up and make their way over here. So if you're here and you just want to say a quick hi in the chat, that would be nice. And then I would know, I know who's here. For the record, the technical challenge was entirely my fault. Hi, Dana. Hi, Kimberly. 2 people. There we go. There's So we'll just, as I say, just give it a couple minutes. Hi, Ima. Do I have that right? Richard said it took a little bit to get connected. No doubt. As I was saying earlier, we had some technical difficulties. My fault entirely. My poor producer does everything possible to make me technically competent, and it just doesn't take. So, hi, everybody. Quality, not quantity. Oh, that's so, so sweet. Somebody from Calgary. I was just in Calgary, actually, maybe 3 weeks ago or something. I did a speech at Rebel Live, and it was what a fantastic, wonderful group of people. I was kind of jealous of people who get to live there. Not that many Ontarians aren't wonderful, because that's certainly true, but there was definitely a certain spirit and vibe out in Calgary. And Lynn, and hold on one second, the dog wants to come in. So very often when we do things, it's all, polished and you record and then you edit after. And tonight is just how life is. So there really is a dog in the background wanting to come in. So anyway, I think because so many of you were a little late already and there are a number of people on, so why don't we get started? And the thinking about this event tonight is that we would just give an opportunity to mark the anniversary of the book that I wrote. You can see it in the background here, My Choice, but to do it in sort of a casual way where it's not just me speaking to a computer and then never getting to hear back from people, but you guys are here and it can be interactive. You can, if you want to, you can pause and ask a question, and we'll have some questions at the end. And so I just want to start by thanking so much. Thank you so much for being here, and especially with the sort of technical challenge we had. I really appreciate that. This is, I know, an especially busy time, and making time for just one more thing during Christmas week or the week leading up to Christmas, if you celebrate Christmas, is not it's not an easy thing. So I really appreciate that. As I said, we wanted to do something on the anniversary of this book. There's the book there. But mostly it's to reflect on what in the world has happened over the last year and now going on 3 years, and to talk a little bit about some of the changes that are going to happen in my life, and to talk a little bit about what we can do moving forward, where we can go from here. Well, there's lots of people here now. Hi, everybody, if you're just joining. um, what brought me to, so my plan for tonight is that I would talk for about 20 minutes and give you some thoughts, and then I would just pause and we would open it up for questions. And please feel free to ask anything. And if you have questions as I'm going along, jot them down or put them in the chat, and I will keep an eye and try to answer them. And we will go for just under an hour, probably, maybe until 5:30. So what brought me to write this book was really a video that I recorded last September that I had no idea what I was doing in the moment when I did it. I didn't know the kind of effect it would have, but that video, it was I recorded it about the situation at Huron College at Western where I worked and the vaccine mandates that happened. And at the time, I'm sure I thought that all of this was really about, the this unethical policy that the university and many other institutions were instituting, were imposing on people. And of course, as time went on, it's become clear that it's about much, much more than that. But in that moment, I had no idea. And I became so heavily criticized and targeted and ostracized by the media, public officials, my colleagues, especially. And I've thought a lot about since then why that video was so controversial, because at the time it felt like I was really just an academic, someone who specialized in ethics, commenting on what should have been a very personal medical choice that 10 years ago or even 4 or 5 years ago would have been easily accepted in our culture. And now it's seen as being so anomalous and so ostracizing. And yes, I'm talking about the COVID vaccine, the choice to get vaccinated or not specifically, but more broadly than that. I mean, whether or not you choose to follow what we've called the narrative and comply with public health measures or not has put you into one or two camps. And so I thought I'd offer a few thoughts tonight, read a couple of snippets from the book, and then we'll open things up to questions. So the book is largely about it's an ethical argument against the mandates, and it's called, I mean, it's even says that in the title. It's My Choice: The Ethical Case Against the COVID-19 Vaccine Mandates. I'm not going to talk about that at all tonight because I think you've either read the book or you've heard my speeches, and if you've not done either of those things, or even if you have, you're probably kind of sick of that topic. And we've all, I think, largely drawn our battle lines on those fronts, and we're not seeing much movement across those lines. People aren't being convinced every day that what they've believed for the last 2 years is wrong. But also, I think the vaccine issue specifically is not really what's at the heart of some of the socio-cultural problems that got us to this point. And I was thinking, I'm quite a fan of, and I'm going to butcher his name, I always do, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago. And he said something in there. He says many things that are very interesting, but one thing he said is something like, if only it were all so simple, if only there were evil people out there who are insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them, and that they had, maybe they had labels on their chests, or like in the old westerns, they wore the black hats, and it was easy to tell the black, the bad guys apart from the white guys. And that's just not how it is. We live in an era now where it's our neighbors who are people who maybe have cared for our children and we've had good coffee conversations with. And they're the people who, over the last 2 years, would have turned us in if they had the opportunity. And so badness and betrayal and evil are things that are not easy to pinpoint these days. And so we live in I think, a very complicated world. I thought in terms of, I mean, there are a lot of different things I could have read from the book, but one thing I wanted to pick is very early on. It's from page 5, and it talks a little bit about the the process of recording the video that ended up going viral, and why I ended up leaving in the bit about at the very end where I kind of just cry and break down in front of the camera, because that's, I think, what most people resonate with when I meet them. Very few people say, "Oh, your ethical arguments are fantastic." Although I hope I hope those resonated with people too. But most people say, it was very emotional. They felt what I felt. They cried with me, and I just think that's so interesting. So I thought I'd read a little bit about that section. So again, this is from page 5, and I wrote, "We decided to record a video with me outlining my stance and thought processes, and the implications for me and for the wider public debate about our COVID response if I did indeed lose my job over my decision," which is something I thought was going to happen at that time. We recorded the video. So I was working with publicity team with the Canadian COVID Care Alliance. So we recorded this video in the first week of September last year, 2021, and published it on the CCCA's Instagram account and a few other platforms. Despite some platforms removing the video after deeming it misinformation, that happened a lot, it went viral. The Instagram post alone has generated more than 1.1 million views. And that was, I mean, the book was written, we published it last December. So I don't know what's happened since then. It has become a lightning rod for both supporters and detractors. And one of the most discussed aspects of the video is the fact that I displayed emotion, normally a valuable currency in the social media world. There is a moment in the latter half of the video, which runs just under 5 minutes, where I frame a question for my putative fall class. So I didn't know at that point if I was going to get to teach my fall ethics class. It turned out I didn't, right? The question is, this is my first and potentially my last lesson of the year. I said it haltingly because tears began to well up. I regained some composure to finish out the video, and as I finished, a rush took over me and I started to cry quietly. One of our communications people said, "Oh, I'll edit that out because I don't want you to have to be crying on camera." I remember at the time really appreciating that. I felt relieved. And then another staffer said, "I think it actually shows the human toll of all of this." So we left it in for better or worse. And in the end, on the worst end, I struggle with its inclusion because philosophical analysis should always be based on reason and not emotion. And it also opened me up to accusations of crocodile tears manufactured to generate sympathy. So I just thought that was an interesting part to read, and maybe afterwards you can give me some of your thoughts about that. But I've thought a lot about why so many people were so compliant, have been, still are, why we don't talk about freedom anymore, why the desire to go with the crowd is so powerful, and why displaying emotion and empathy is such a bad thing. Why does that automatically make you, you know, a villain of some kind or a manipulative person? Why is it bad to show emotion about really important things? My own view about this is that we got to this point, we complied, we're flirting with it, and not just with respect to COVID, but we are so captivated by the other narratives going on in the world, whether it's about the Ukraine war or about energy, fuel, I mean, or about the environmental issue. And I think all of it stems from the fact that we are flirting with the idea of statism. And I've talked about this a little bit lately in speeches because it's really where I think our focus needs to be. And statism is basically the idea that we endow the state, whether at the local, national, or now global level, with omnipotence, perfect power. We give it decision-making power over all aspects of our lives, not just political, but economic, educational, judicial, psychological, sexual now, moral. And what I think separates people now and puts, whether it's a matter of right wing, left wing, pro or anti narrative people, is whether or not you want to accept or reject that story. Whether or not you want to outsource your thinking to some kind of state entity that's willing to do it for you and make decisions about your life, or you don't want to do that and you want to do it for yourself. And I have to say, I mean, the idea of statism is really enticing because the state is offering protection, it's offering money, and a lot of money in some cases, it's offering assurances of safety, it's offering pre-packaged experts who are offering their expertise, which means that we don't have to figure any of those things out for ourselves. And a lot of these questions are really hard. And as much as we might value freedom, I mean, it's right in our national anthem, right? The true north, strong and free, figuring out how to take care of ourselves in a complex world when it comes to figuring out questions about our health, education, politics, home, environment, electronic currencies, Bitcoin, blockchain, now artificial intelligence, all these things, it can all feel a bit overwhelming and a bit much and a bit like making our own choices in that complicated world where so many people are choosing to outsource their thinking, which means they're making decisions that are the same as what they're being told to do, and therefore the same as everybody else. If you make your own decision, you are conspicuous, and being conspicuous is something that we're very evolutionarily conditioned to avoid. So if there's someone out there who's saying, I'm the expert. I am going to tell you what you have to do, which means you don't have to figure it out for yourself. Um, I'll probably pay you or otherwise incentivize you to make those choices. And I guarantee that you can keep flying under the radar and keep your job and keep your friend group and keep going to restaurants and gyms and keep your luxury car and all these things you want. That's pretty enticing. But one thing that's I think important is that in that story, there's no room for humanity, right? Statism doesn't allow for empathy and crying and individualism and creativity. You need to be robotic, right? You need to be unthinking in order to get those benefits. And I think that one of the big lessons over the last few years is not that we were encouraged to make the wrong decisions about our health, but that we never should have been encouraged to make decisions at all, right? So it's not that public health, government officials, Health Canada, the CPSO, so the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, it's not that they gave us the wrong advice. It's that they shouldn't have been giving us orders at all. And I'm going to say something really controversial here, but it isn't clear to me that public health should exist at all. It isn't clear to me that an institute like Health Canada should exist at all. It isn't clear to me that the government should have an arm that's focused on making decisions about people's health. And that's because health is, I think, just too deeply connected to who we are as a person in order for it to be a state function. It should be a private function always. And it's not even clear to me, and I know this is very controversial, it's not even clear that medical colleges should exist like the CPSO. And that we might be better off if we return governance over people's health to a private contract between principals and agents, physicians and patients. So that, I said, very controversial. We can maybe talk a little bit about that at the end. One thing is that, making orders about people's health, overriding their own decisions, undermines the very reason that we form a state in the first place. We have lived, I think, in a state, so in countries and nation states for so long that it's easy to forget that they're not natural, right? The existence of humans predates the existence of any form of government. Governments and the states are human constructs. Humans made a decision at some point to construct it. Political philosophers, early modern political philosophers like Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau have stories about how we decided that life in the state of nature, so without government, was so, they said, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, that we decided to turn over our absolute freedom in exchange for some protection. But that protection was very minimal and the freedom we were giving up was very minimal. And when the state asks too much of us, wants to take too much freedom from us, then it ceases to legitimately exist, because the reasons for its existence are no longer powerful, are no longer in effect. So the state, in other words, ceases to become legitimate when the costs outweigh the benefits of belonging to it, when it asks us to give up who we are as people. So when we became, and still are, I think, seduced by this story of statism, it's in part because I think of the bombardment of information and internet culture that has just trained us to lock ourselves in our computer and on our mobile devices especially, and create a kind of public opinion that was ultimately controlled by whoever is disseminating that information, whether it's big tech or major media across most of the planet, which, as we saw with COVID, manufactured an almost perfectly lockstep, homogeneous narrative without including or allowing for any other scientific counterpoints. So I wanted to just finish with a couple of big picture things I've noticed over the last now 3 years, I guess. And the one is that if you do any reading in the history of medicine and the history of infectious diseases, for example, one thing you notice about what was going on in the culture is that science always postdates the narratives about those illnesses. Or maybe a better way to say that is that the narratives always predate the science. So the narratives come first, and then the science comes along later. And that's been called the great common of pandemics, whether we're talking about leprosy or the Black Death in the 14th century in Europe. We get these narratives that create a sort of cognitive dissonance and groupthink. And that always comes from the fact that there's this fear, this mass hysteria of contagion, and that creates a kind of restriction and isolation. And along with that, there's just this fertile environment for abusive and corrupt practices to happen, which is what we've seen. The thing about COVID is it didn't need to be this way, from what I understand, that the science was known through our experience with influenza and knowledge of mucosal immunology. In the early 2000s, research with SARS-CoV-1 through DARPA. So DARPA is the research arm of the US military, knew that ivermectin was the way to treat it. And we've just seen the power and the pervasive influence of the pharmaceutical industry at every level of political and medical decision making. And we underestimated, I think, just how powerful that was. And we didn't need to be captivated by fear. We didn't need to have mass hysteria this time, because we easily could have managed this. And from what I understand from so many real, I think, experts I've spoken with, we would have been in a far different place now than we ended up being. We have a tendency, I think, to think that we're reason driven, that we are the heirs of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment was all about focusing on reason. But what we do, I think, is really rationalize facts so that they conform to our emotions and they fit a given narrative. William Bernstein, I don't know if you will have heard of him. He wrote The Delusions of Crowds and Why People Go Mad in Groups. And he said that we are the apes who tell stories. And no matter how misleading the narrative, if it is compelling enough, it will always trump the facts. So the fact that whenever there's this fear of contagion, the narrative machine gets going first. And then usually when saner heads prevail, the science steps in to say, no, this is what we should have done. This fear was real. This fear wasn't real. We should have calmed down. We should have done this. And unfortunately, by then it's often too late to address some of the harm that we've done. The other thing I've noticed over the last couple of years is this incredible ostracization, this incredible othering of people. We want to figure out who our people are, who our tribes are, and we stick to those tribes and we ostracize and vilify and see everyone else as other as much as we possibly can. And it's this fear, it seems, of contagion, right? Of being invaded, that are physically and also maybe metaphorically, that has turned the sick, the potentially sick, and even those who maybe don't fear getting sick enough, who don't take the pandemic seriously enough, into scapegoats. There's so much interesting psychological literature about this. S. Folks, who was a psychoanalyst working during the Second World War, had the idea that the individual is preconditioned to the core by his community even before he is born, and is imprinted vitally by the group which brings him up. Whether it's mob mentality or mass formation psychosis, whatever you want to call it, it's been so powerful to see over the last year the way we find and identify with particular groups, then we absorb ourselves into and become homogeneous, echo chambering. I'm seeing someone say exactly. And then we are polarized from groups on the other side, and we will do anything to protect our group because that protects us, right? With COVID, I don't know if it could have been so powerful if we didn't have this asymptomatic transmission part of the story. The idea that, oh my goodness, you're dangerous. You could kill someone even though you don't seem to be sick yourself. And what it did is it makes it seem like this illness can make its sneaky passage through society undetected, stealthily to threaten our physical bodies, which made things like lockdown and staying home and saving lives make a lot of sense. I not a physician or a scientist, but working in the humanities, whenever I'm curious about a concept, I always look at the origin of the word first. That's where I go first, always. So the etymology of the word. And if you look at contagion, its origin is probably what you would expect. It comes from two Latin words, con, which means together, and tangere, which means to touch. So to touch together, that makes some kind of sense, right? But interestingly, in the 14th century, the idea developed that it could mean something not just physically unclean, but morally unclean, right? So contagion refers to the idea of not just a physical illness, but the spread of contagious thoughts that arise in an atmosphere of fear. And I think that's certainly true of a disease like leprosy. So you put together the ideas that our fear generates a story that outruns the fact, this idea that narrative always predates science, and a story that makes us suspicious of other people, including morally suspicious. So if you're on the wrong side of the COVID narrative, you look at other people or they look at you and say, oh, they're not just dangerous immunologically, they're dangerous ideologically. Their ideas are dangerous. And you just have a perfect recipe for social and moral disaster. I don't want to end things on doom and gloom. So I thought I would read another little snippet from the book. This is from page 78, and it's in the chapter called A Way Forward. So I'll read it and then I'll kind of explain what's going on. These past couple of years, now 3 years, right, have been one massive COVID test. And by that, I don't mean anything strictly scientific. It has been a test of our social sensibilities, our tendencies towards both cohesion and ostracization, and above all, a test of our morality. I think what it's revealed is that we are so much more inclined to sliding scales and double standards than we ever would have thought, or at least cared to admit. There has been a near complete collapse of the concept that was a hallmark of 20th century social progress: my body, my rights. The erasure of individualism that's behind the collapse seems on the surface to enhance the possibility of unity, but unity can exist in more than one form. And the unity found at the end of a bayonet point or government edict is no stronger, I would hope less in fact, than the unity that comes from the respect for the uniqueness of each member of the body politic and a sharing of common values and purposes. Yes, it's a given that democracy requires a certain kind of cooperation. It requires individuals not just to think of themselves and for themselves, but to think about how their actions will affect their neighbors. I like to envision a solid democracy as a talented and seasoned choir. Not every person needs to sing exactly the same part in exactly the same way, in the same pitch in order for it to work. In fact, beauty comes from a kind of harmonic discord. So I really do think that's true. There's been so much talk about democracy over the last couple of years, whether it's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing, whether we need to reinvent it in Canada, do away with it altogether. And I'm not someone who's ever thought that democracy was perfect. Of course, Churchill said something like, it's terrible, but it's the best thing we've got. And he may have gotten that from Plato, who said that it's one of the worst forms of government. And Plato's view is that, unfortunately, you I don't know how to say this in a nice way, but I'll put it on Plato because he said it. He said that unfortunately most people are too stupid to be able to rely on them to make decisions. And I don't like the word stupid, but I think the idea he's getting at is that making decisions about our lives and about government policies is hugely important. And I think we've seen over the last couple of years that people just seem to make them so unreflectively. And that's a real worry. And I think we have a bit of an identity crisis now in Canada, especially thinking about how do we move forward? How do we elect better leaders? What does a better leader look like? How do we restructure policies? How do we better protect our constitution such that bad leaders can't circumvent it when they want to? How do we reweave the fabric of our culture regardless of what's going on in Queen's Park or in our House of Commons, right? So many questions. I've just learned so much. I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that we've been through a lot, trial by fire, as they say, and that can lead us to feeling like we're a victim or that we're sorry for ourselves. But another way to look at it, as corny as it might sound, is that going through these trials, being on the wrong side of things or the right side of things at the wrong time is kind of a gift because it creates an opportunity to make ourselves stronger. It's, if you think about it, a good life is about building a character of a certain kind. And it's pretty hard to build character just following orders, accepting government handouts, lying on the couch, binge watching, online shopping, eating all your troubles away under a warm blanket. It's pretty hard to develop character that way. If you want to live well, if you want to be strong, then you need to go out into the world. You need to stand in the cold, which some people have literally done. You need to be challenged. You need to speak when it's uncomfortable, confront what scares you, stand alone sometimes. And you might even be hurt, terribly so. I think the silver lining in all of this crisis, as in all human crises, is that it will make you stronger. I know they say what doesn't kill you make you stronger. Well, it does kind of, because just like physical exercise, when you lift weights, you have to tear the muscle fibers in order to build them back better and stronger. Our moral strength is like that too. We have to be hurt. We have to be broken. We have to tear ourselves apart psychologically. And then if we work at it, we will grow back better and stronger. So I've talked long enough. I'm so grateful, so happy to see so many of you here. I'm thrilled to see so many people. I'd love to ask some questions, answer some questions. Does anybody have questions? I'm looking to see if there are lots of lovely comments, lots of people from somebody from Port Elgin, lots of people saying they have similar stories. Somebody from BC. So lovely. Glad to be here with you today. That's so nice. Winnipeg, Vancouver, Lethbridge, lots of people from the West. Hi, everybody from the West. Oh, lots of people. So nice. Sounds like a follow-up book is coming. I should talk about this a little bit. So I mentioned we did an event in Whitby last Tuesday between Conrad Black and Jordan Peterson. I did some introductory comments and closing remarks. And I mentioned during that speech that was my last public event, and either for a while or forever. And that's true. I am stopping. So I've been working for the Democracy Fund as their ethics scholar for the last year plus, maybe a little bit more. And I've decided to stop that for a while, not because of any trouble with the Democracy Fund. I'm very supportive of them. I think they do wonderful work, and I hope you keep supporting them. But I have a young daughter, and I've just found that I really need to, I wouldn't say reprioritize, but to spend more time with her and on her. And I'm sure many of you can appreciate this, that we don't live in a world, I don't think, where it feels okay just to send our children out into the world without thinking too much about it. And to be honest, my daughter's very young, but whenever I've done that, some things have happened that I'm not thrilled about. So I need to make that my priority now. And you should tell me what you think, but I feel like one of the reasons we've gotten to this point is because when we were parents, we decided not to be parents. we decided that it was okay or better for other people to raise our children. And as someone who taught at university for a long time, I saw the results of that and I saw it shifting every year. And our young people are in a really bad way. And I think they've not been supported. And I think they need more of that. And they're going to need more supportive guidance as they try to figure out how to navigate this complicated and quite honestly probably pretty horrendous world for the next few years or a few decades, definitely. So even though I'm not going to be doing this job anymore and not have such a public presence, I do have 2 book projects in the works for next year. So one will be for the Democracy Fund, and it will be basically a citizen's history on how the various institutions that were involved in generating and perpetrating the COVID response came to do so terribly. So media, education, medicine, uh, private industry, like big pharma. So that'll be one book for the Democracy Fund. And then I also have a contract with Brownstone Institute in the States, and that'll be a collection of short essays. So essays about probably not COVID specifically, but things about, how did we get here? What's going on? How do we move forward? I'm writing a little essay right now on ritual and how things like lockdowns and distancing dissolved ritual or tried to in society, and why that matters and what we've lost and why it's important to get that back. And I was thinking about that a lot as we approach Christmas or Hanukkah, if you celebrate Hanukkah. Ritual is so important, and yet I think it's not always clear why that is. So essays like that. Anyway, does that answer the question about the book and what I'm up to next? So many nice comments. Oh my goodness, like just reams and reams of them. That's so lovely. Well, you guys all say you appreciate me. I appreciate you. My goodness. I mean, it's this would all be so much worse if I was doing this alone or if each one of you was doing it alone. And one thing I certainly realized, I had a great privilege to be able to go to so many events and meet so many people over the last year, including through lockdown and when we weren't supposed to be doing it. But I realized just how many people there are out there like us who think that what's going on is not right. And they're very sane, very rational, often very educated or very thoughtful people. And so if you're out there feeling lonely, which you could be because your corner of the world might be different, if you're feeling that way, just please know that there's an awful lot of very good people who often don't get to see the light of day in media or social media because it's all designed to prevent that. But they're there, and they're just some of the best people I've ever met. So. Oh, somebody asked, Kimberly, I don't know where you're from, Kimberly, how do you propose we address the stupidity factor? This is a question that I've thought about so much. And I've thought about it long before COVID happened, because again, teaching university, and I felt like there has been a very gradual dumbing down, we've heard it called, I think that's fair, of the intelligence among young people in the classroom, in writing, in speaking over the last 2 decades. I mean, I first went to university early 90s. I'm going to be dating myself. But I think there has been probably a more massive shift from that point to now than maybe many other points in history. I think I remember the day internet came in the classroom, and it has never been the same since. I make that point because stupidity, it's not just about IQ. It's not just about the facts you're able to retain in your mind or not able to retain in your mind, but it has to do with interest and focus and attention. And the internet has made those things very, very hard, right? And I think when you there are a lot of great things about what the internet has allowed for. It's allowed us to do this. It's allowed for video-based content, and it's allowed for independent media, which was kind of saved us over the last couple of years. But there's an immediacy and a temporality to it, in the sense that that's not what I mean. I mean, there's a cadence to it that's very fast-paced, and it's not conducive to pausing and reflection and meditating on an idea for a while, working on an idea for a while, um, solving a problem, uh, persisting through frustration to problem solve and invent something, and never mind, yeah, invention, creativity, and ingenuity. Why would we ever need that? Because anything we figure we can think of is just going to pop up on the internet sometime soon, right? So I think the internet has been a real problem, and I think if we want to address that, we have to figure out either how to make it work for us and not the other way around, or we have to envision a life that's not so heavily reliant on it, you know? And I think people are doing that. I think I was in a small town a couple of days ago that had a number of independent bookstores, and they were more full of stock books and also customers than I have ever seen them. And I did wonder if that's a bit of a backlash, if it's almost a little bit of a renaissance to the time when we had a slower life, a calmer life. I'm just reading this one book and thinking about this one set of ideas right now. And I'm not just flipping and browsing and scrolling from one to the next to the next to the next. And I think we're probably starting to see the benefits of pausing longer on something. Teaching, like I said before, though, about being a parent, teaching that to our children when other ways of accessing information are so much easier and more immediate and probably socially acceptable is not an easy task for sure. I'm just looking to see if there are other questions. Will I still continue to advocate for critical thinking? Of course. I can't. Anybody who knows me in my personal life knows that you can't really make me shut up or make me stop thinking. I will always be thinking. I couldn't even imagine, if stopping work if stopping this job meant stopping thinking and reflecting, it just wouldn't happen. The wheels are always turning. I'm doing the dishes and I'm thinking about the next thing I can be writing or working on. That's just natural. Um, how do we hold, Scott Ashton says, how do we hold true to our unpopular views without abandoning the usefulness of our institutions, or to the right of others to hold their short-sighted views? That's really interesting, Scott. I don't know if you saw the conversation between Conrad Black and Jordan Peterson last week, but they started out by talking about the institutions. I think Conrad asked Jordan, what do you see as the future of our universities? And Jordan's answer was pretty harsh. He said, I don't really see a future for them, because people are ultimately going to realize that they don't need to pay $100,000 to get this subpar product anymore, right? And Scott, you're probably not just talking about universities, but also medical institutions and journalism and various government and then private sector institutions. But I guess people I talk to seem to have one of two views about this. Either they need to be raised, they need to be brought to the ground and built up wholly anew. And given the level of corruption in them, I'm a bit inclined to that position myself. I think we've been too heavily reliant on them. We're terrified that a loss of our fundamental institutions will mean a loss of our lives, and that's in some sense, I think, a reflection of how dependent we've become. And it's a lesson to us to try to make ourselves more independent. It will be very interesting, I think, on the education front to see how some of these new online universities, Peterson Academy, the one in Austin that I never remember the name of, and then some of the new brick and mortar universities how they will fare Will students shift to them? Will more students cease to choose post-secondary institution education at all and opt for other things? We haven't always, it's funny, we haven't always gone to university. We haven't always gone to specialist physicians, and if you're thinking, well, thank goodness we do because we're so sick and we need, well, we have specialized medical institutions more now than we ever have. And I'm not going to state this in a declarative way, but I'll ask the question, are we healthier than we've ever been? I think it's a good question to think about, to look at. Let's see. Many of our best creative, youthful Canadians have already left. Yes, I hear about this every day. Yeah. Lots of people homeschooling. Will I continue? Somebody asked, will I continue painting? I don't know how many of you know. In my former life, in addition to teaching philosophy at university, I was also a painter, like an art painter, not a house painter. Maybe we'll see. It's motherhood. It takes a lot of work, I'm discovering, but I certainly hope to. It's a creative outlet. I think I felt like it was a luxury I couldn't afford over the last 2 years. We were so much in crisis. And that's very sad, I think, because we've lost, those are the things that make life worth living. And to feel like, for our government to have put us in a place where we can no longer do the things that make life worth living, that should tell us something, Lots of people with comments about how hard this has been on young people. I cannot even imagine, if I think about, at this point in my life, I'm pretty sure what I think about things. I like to be open still, but I have a pretty good sense of self. And, if you've been through experiences and you have a chance to look at what we're going through now and compare it to past experience and knowledge and education, and all these things, that's one thing. But you kind of have a solidity, a kind of a balance point, But to be, oh my goodness, I don't know, to be 20, I remember being in university, being 19, and just how you're pulled in so many different directions. You don't know what to think about anything, which is great because there's so many opportunities and so many different ideas and things to think about. But also to have this happen when you're in that kind of psychological flux, I can't imagine, and to be even younger than that. Kids who are 9 are now 11. So at the beginning of the pandemic, who were 9 are now 11. Like, it's just mind blowing. I don't know I'd be curious to know. I don't know if there's any way to know what the hardest hit age group, was over the last few years. But I'm sure they've all suffered in ways. They've all suffered in ways clearly that are horrendous and unnecessary. Oh, here's a comment. What do we do if the courts continue to fail us? Very good question. They have, certainly, and there have been a few anomalous judgments. Judgments, whether it's about the vaccine mandates, who have ruled in favor of a non-vaccinating parent. Western dropped the mandate, not really directly as a result of the court case, I suppose, but did drop their mandate afterwards. What do we do if the courts continue to fail us? It's not the judges who are in place now have been conditioned and educated, I'll say, for decades. So the thinking that even Commissioner Rouleau, right, at the Public Order Emergency Commission, as sort of sane and balanced as he seemed, I have no doubt what his report will look like. And he's handpicked by the government we have in power now to investigate itself, which, my goodness, we need to figure out a better way to do that moving forward. But that's the system we had. There's no way someone like that, in that position, chosen in that way, will ever produce a report vilifying the government. There's no way that's going to happen. So what do we do about it? It's not I is it a top-down approach? Is it a bottom-up approach? My own feeling is that fixing our troubles with the judiciary and with the media and with healthcare, um, it has to start young. It has to start with the way with the culture of education that creates these people. So this is a decades long approach. I think a lot of stock has been put in particular politicians like Pierre Poilievre and Danielle Smith, for example, and very impressed with what Premier Smith is doing. I'm very hopeful about what Pierre Poilievre might do, although I'm also, I wouldn't say I'm cynical, but I just want to be cautious about putting all our eggs in the basket of some politician to save us, because honestly, when has that ever happened in history? It's not impossible, but it's very rare. And I think we can't just say, well, let's get the right politician in power and they'll fix everything. And then we can sit back and, whew, I did my job. It's going to take, I think, constant pressure and pushing to see changes at this level. So that, I mean, that doesn't answer your question at all, because it's a terribly hard question. What do we do if the courts fail us? I think they will. And I think we have to do a lot of things kind of at the grassroots level to change how we educate and create the people who end up there in the first place. Oh, so many comments. Wow, lovely. Well, we're about 5 minutes away from the point at which we were going to end. Does anybody have any burning questions you want to? I think there's a super chat function. So if you want your question to pop up to the top where it's really obvious to me, you can make it a super chat question. You can tell how little I know about technology. Oh, somebody asked light fire me. Somebody asked, Dr. Ponesse, in your opinion, how would you prevent the madness of crowds? Is there something that can slow or stop the precipitation of that? Do you know what? When was it? A couple months now, maybe? I had the pleasure, I mean, it's probably longer than that. I had the pleasure of interviewing Matthias Desmet, the Belgian psychologist. And for those of you who don't know, he wrote a book called The Psychology of Totalitarianism, which was sort of inspired by Hannah Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism. And such an interesting guy. He writes about mass psychosis, and I asked him something like this. Okay, we talked for a while about how mass hysteria gets going and how we've seen that reflected in our institutions and how it creates blindness and how it's stoked by fear and all these things. And then at the end, I asked him something like, okay, so given all of that, what do we do about it? And he said that, the level that we're at, it's we're not going to see a lot of change with little action. We're really at a very high level of a kind of mass psychosis. But he did say historically that it's always been the little voice of the minority, in our case, probably a vast minority, that just keeps questioning, that won't remain silent, that just keeps picking away at the narrative. And eventually, it seems to resonate with people subconsciously, probably. But he said it's always that little voice that prevents the final slide into the worst things that humans are capable, like the thing I'm not ever supposed to talk about, like Nazi atrocities and mass genocide, right? But his view is that those little voices, it feels so insignificant. It feels, you're sitting around the Christmas dinner table with your whole family who's on the other side, and you feel like, well, what's the point? But it does seem like asking little questions, making little comments, being that little voice can ultimately be effective. It matters what you say, I think. This is not Matthias's view. We didn't talk about that, but I think it matters what you say. I think that being sarcastic with people isn't useful. I think pointing out all the ways they've been wrong over the last year isn't useful. People on both sides of this are exhausted and worn down and defensive and vulnerable and raw. Somebody I gave a speech at Rebel Live in Calgary, and someone asked this sort of question there. They wanted to know exactly the kind of facts you should give someone to convince them that you're right, your view of the narrative is right. And I said, I don't think there is any. There are any this kind of statements, facts that I said. I think that questions are a lot more likely to at least keep the relationship open long enough. So if you ask someone something like, well, I just noticed that Krista Freeland got her, I don't know, 15th booster, whatever it was today on social media, right? So if you say to someone, well, why, charitably, what is she thinking? It's going to prevent the illness that everyone ended up getting anyway, or I don't know. That's kind of sarcastic. It's hard not to be sarcastic. It seems so ridiculous. I think that we need to be kind with people, and even then they might not be interested in listening to us, right? But we need to be just confronting people with more and more and more facts is not likely to be effective. I said a while ago publicly somewhere that I don't think I personally have heard of one case of someone being convinced that the narrative is wrong on the basis of the presentation of facts alone. They either saw some really harmful effects in their own lives. They saw effects of COVID response, COVID policies in their families or in their friend groups, and they kind of woke up just by seeing it themselves. Or subconsciously, maybe some of these thoughts have sunk into their mind. But it's not like in the process of an argument with an anti-narrative person, they said, oh, I think you are right after all. Having said that, there are some people on the freedom side of things, if we want to call it that, who I talk with and who say, I wasn't aware of all of this at the beginning. It took me a while to come around. So I think that's interesting. I think it's really, really promising. But the madness of crowds, goodness, how powerful is this? It's a story we keep repeating over and over again. If you think of the biblical story of Babel or fascisms that swept across Europe. And it never, fascism, totalitarianism, it never comes storming in from the desert with a flag that says, I'm here to take over your life. It's very insidious, and it always presents itself as the good guy. And probably after a period of life not being so great, and you think, maybe this will make life better. Right? And it never does. And it's a story that we keep repeating over and over and over again throughout history, at least since the Greeks, since classical times. And I dare say it's one that we're going to keep repeating over and over again. But unless finally, hopefully, we learn our lesson from all of this. Oh, somebody asked, I'm going to pose this question, but I don't know how to answer it. Northier Than Thou asked, how do we stop digital ID? Yeah, very much so. I'm not an expert on this by any means, but my own thinking about it and vaccine passports and all of these things that want to centralize information, power, and decision making and take it away from the individual need to be resisted at all costs if you want to resist them, right? I don't think there's any sense in which you can dip your toe in that water and get your foot back again, if that makes any sense, right? We saw that didn't work. Like early minimal forms of compliance didn't work. Speaking of Jordan Peterson earlier, he got vaccinated earlier on, and I think he was pretty heavy-handed in telling the rest of us to do so. But then he said to the government, look, I did what you wanted, now leave me alone. And of course they don't, because when you've demonstrated that kind of compliance initially, it's like a hungry predator detecting blood, and they're always going to go for it, you know? So I think we need to be really aware of the various parts of our lives in which banking, um, internet, education, government policies are trying to, and medicine, of course, are trying to take control away from us over things that really matter. You know? Oh, somebody's from Toronto. Will I be involved with Peterson University? I have no idea. I don't plan to be involved with any anything for a while. Donna Ruth said, interesting. She said, we need more literature about how we got to this point here in Canada. Don't you guys find it shocking that so little has been written about COVID? I mean, there's more now, more really interesting Substack or Medium articles. Epoch Times is great. But if you scroll through the book list on Amazon or something, there aren't that many books about, I don't just mean COVID, but about like the odd cultural things that have happened or that have shown us who we really are over the last few years or something, you know? Um, so Donna goes on to say, uh, that requires deep reflection and mental organization. I suspect some of that will be in your essay book. Yes, yes, I think so. Yes, absolutely. Francesca said, are we healthier? Absolutely not. Oh, so many thoughts and questions. Well, you guys, I'm so grateful for you joining. We're pretty much out of time unless anybody has a burning question, but I'm really, I know I've said it many times, but I'm very grateful to you. Please don't give up, even if you are in one of these corners of the world where you kind of feel alone. Um, I'm not gone forever. Um, there'll be a new book through the Democracy Fund early in 2023. And then hopefully, if all goes well, early in 2023. And then another book through Brownstone later. And I'll probably come back to do some promoting of each of those things. So thank you so much. Thank you for taking time out of your Tuesday evening when you probably have cookies to bake and presents to wrap and things to do. I really appreciate that. And just meeting so many Canadians and so many, I see we have some people from not just from Canada, from other parts of the world as well. So thanks so much, everyone. It's wonderful. Have a good night.